Hello and welcome everyone to the fifth episode of Firespeech. Today's topic is on storytelling, the past, present, and the future. Stories have always been a very powerful tool. We can even say that human beings are primarily storytelling creatures because the way we survive is we create a story of the world in our head, and that is what we do to reduce the complexity of the world around us. Over the years, we managed to not just create stories in our head, we also managed to bring those representations to the outside world. This has allowed so many beautiful storylines that have been panned out throughout history. We have amazing works of literature, and we can even say that most of our foundations of religion is based on these stories. Religious stories are the oldest stories, and every other literature that came after it are probably inspired by these stories. In today's age, stories have gotten convoluted. Jordan Peterson says that a work of story is something, when you're writing a story, it is a act of subconscious representation of an idea. And today, sadly, unfortunately, some of the stories have turned into propaganda and it's affecting our culture. So, a discussion on storytelling, I think, is somewhat very important. And that is why we're doing it today. Yeah, that was my intro.
Okay, sounds good. Uh, cool. Can we just start freewheeling? Because you made me think of something.
Yeah, go.
Okay, so well, since we're in pandemic times, I guess it's relevant to bring up viruses, and I guess it's the best I can do as an analogy. Um, stories obviously are important. They're sort of our simulation of things, right? Rather than um, act out whether I should go, say, fight a bear. I could tell a story about, what happens to people who fight bears when they're not prepared, and then that'll do. That'll keep me safe instead of having to try it. And obviously, it can be used as a powerful propaganda tool. And so, like a virus, if the human population isn't inoculated for whatever reason, like
Hmm.
say herdsmen are from certain viruses, then yeah, things like propaganda will just sweep across populations. So we can look at propaganda as, on one hand, as this like awful thing. We see pictures of Stalin in our head and Hitler and Goebbels and things like that. But that those that's going to arise if you're not inoculated, and there's no real way to get inoculated without having caught that in the first place. It's in
Right.
some sense, you see. So the remedy to this isn't. Well, I guess the remedy to this, in my mind, is the same as what your remedy would be to a virus. So you can lock yourself in the house and make sure you're not exposed to any sort of propaganda or any sort of ideas. That's one way to do it. The problem is that the same with the virus. If you do somehow encounter one gets through the cracks, then you're completely hosed. Uh, so the things like this, exposing yourself to people who you uh, might find controversial, right? Ben Shapiro, for example, is not a very, in my opinion, not a very pleasant person to listen to. He's kind of shrill. He's a little bit nasal. I'm nasal now because I have a cold, but and he's not a very nice guy. But I think he and Jordan Peterson, a lot of these guys are doing sort of a non-genocidal inoculation for that kind of propaganda, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So
And one of the things that I think also has been affecting stories recently is you can say that in some way they are being censored, at least in some countries, like in Asian countries. For example, in India, we have this problem of censoring anything that's against culture. And I think that is not really a good direction to go because that's really taking away the creative freedom from the writers and the artists. That is never a good way to do anything. I don't think art should be censored. People should have the freedom to express their thoughts. And when you have these censorships happening, it kind of forces you to follow a certain narrative that the society would agree upon. And because our societies are constantly evolving, you can see that in the shift in the storylines. Like it's almost as if like most superhero movies need to have a black character in it, not because the character was inherently black, but because you can't you can't just have white actors in a movie. And it's the same with you have these LGBTQ characters who are not originally LGBTQ, but you make them LGBTQ so that it fits with the narrative that's been out there today. And I think when you're forced to do it, something like that, it kind of ruins the whole story, the purity of the story, and that I think is a major problem. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree with the sentiment, right? So, I'm trying to think of a good example. Maybe say like I don't know. Only thing that comes to my head is like Hamilton, say, which got really popular in America. I never actually saw it, but it's like a retelling of America's founding story, and
Hmm.
I think it features like a black character as Hamilton or something like that, which historically, black people were not people then.
Hmm.
So yes, it's not accurate, and yes, that's obviously kind of shoehorned in to be like, look how cool we are now. Um, but something in my mind tells me that that's not going to hold up. That a lot of these things where if there's a story there's shoehorned diversity in there, I have a feeling that that's not going to hold. It's like watching a building that's like, okay, this thing's going to get demolished and outdated in 5 years. This isn't timeless. Um,
Yeah,
and maybe not. Maybe it'll be the thing that people talk about in 100 years, and real stuff will fall on the wayside. But to me, this is all just kind of a I don't really have a word for it, like a temporary fix for a deeper problem. But people think they can fix it by saying, well, we'll just tell a different story when it doesn't quite work out like that.
yeah. Like one example that I was just Googling for was right now, the new James Bond movie. If I search a new James Bond movie, one of the news that shows up is Bond's number is up. Black female actor is the new 007. Like,
Right. Right.
yeah, things like this. And it's not just any random ass article, it's from The Guardian. So, why can't we just have a new franchise that is having a leading female actor? And why do we need to? It feels very forced. I
It
don't
is.
know
It
why.
totally is. It totally is because well, here's why. Because uh, so I guess because you're ignoring the subconscious element to it, right? So James Bond is created by, in this like kind of tension between two superpowers. Here's this guy who's kind of removed. It's a Wild West story, right?
Yeah,
But in modern times, this guy is removed from society, but has to protect it, and he doesn't follow the rules. That's kind of what his trade off is, and you could totally explore that because that is a real archetype, I guess. That
yeah,
you know the people who protect society are generally the people who can't live in it very well, and that comes with its freedoms. That comes with its emotional, you know,
yeah.
taxes. Right? A lot of those guys don't really have good families in real life, and that's why we can relate to those guys. Um, So, and if you try to do that with like, all right, well, here's a black girl, James Bond. Okay, what's her struggle? She feels oppressed, but she works for the CIA. You know what I mean? That the story
Yeah.
falls apart the instant you try to think at all about anything deeper than the color of her skin, which is why it won't sustain. It'll make a ton of money and it won't stick around. In 2 years, no one's going to remember it.
There's two things about that. One is the typical archetypes discussion, which is we can say that almost what's happening with stories these days is that we are trying to break away from those archetypes and create new ones. And the problem with doing that is most of those archetypes are very connected with our biology. And even if you change those archetypes to meet the needs of society, we still won't be able to change our biology, which doesn't really help in connecting with these new stories. It's just going to do some brainwashing, which is not going to help. And the other thing is about money, right? So if you tick these specific check boxes, like for example, black woman actress starring as a James Bond, it's it's going to be successful, at least financially. So maybe that is also a reason why things like these are happening. It's an easy way to make money, and making a successful movie is very hard. So you kind of want to follow these rules of society that would help them more people watch the movie and maybe make more money. And maybe that is a major problem where good movies or movies that are dealing with complex topics are not being financially rewarded as well as, these kind of propaganda movies.
But yeah, the way I see it, I think that's tragic. But the way I see it, it's kind of probably the feeling people got in the late 1800s, early 1900s when theater was crumbling under the weight of new forms of media.
Hmm.
You could you could lament the fact that no one does Shakespeare anymore. No one does the 20-minute soliloquies, which are gorgeous. Uh, but that's just not where the medium is anymore. Maybe someday, maybe some reenactors will come back, but once film comes, theater's over. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening now. It's not that we're divorcing from archetypes. You can try to do that all you like. And maybe that's where this whole deconstruction philosophy, like nihilism and existentialism, that's where it reaches its limit because
Hmm.
they see film is running out of good stories, and that might be true. And their solution, their analysis is, well, that's because nothing really means anything. So let's try to leave it. Let's go full. What's the movement? The datist, the nonsense one.
Yeah.
And so their diagnosis is right. Their solution is not because they're trying to leave that biological structure, which you just can't really do. What you have to do is keep the biological structure, what's really there, and take it to wherever you're going next. So, in my opinion, video games actually were that medium. Uh, Surprisingly enough, you have some surprisingly deep stories and told by people who you wouldn't expect to be telling those stories, computer nerds. But there you go.
Yeah. Good thing that you
So,
brought up video games. What's your favorite video game story?
ooh man, that's a good one. I was in my mind. This might not be my favorite, but we were thinking of talking about female archetypes or
Hmm.
inappropriate and inappropriate roles, and Portal was a really big, deep one to me.
Yeah.
Uh, it told a story with the protagonist saying nothing, which that's an interesting way to put it. But and I don't really know what it means. I don't know what Portal means. Something about rationalism and science versus something else. Um, but I mean, I think for years people will be able to come back to that game and talk about it. And in 20 years there might be some academic course, but I just have a gut feeling that Portal goes way deeper than anybody thinks.
Yeah, I did try playing the game. It was amazing. Like the mechanics in itself was very
Yeah,
cool. It was a
yeah,
very well made game, and the character didn't feel forced. It's just like the Tomb Raider
yes,
games, right? You wouldn't want a guy to star in a Tomb Raider game. Like
sure.
it's just the way it is. Like we don't need to bring in let things be just why are we forcing such narratives into the story? Like it's just like that Portal just it fit. It made a fit. Like it was a good movie, good game in general, and I think there will be a movie on it as well because the storyline was very it felt like Westworld-ish in complexity, so it would make a good movie or a TV series, I guess.
Yeah, maybe the world is what's appealing. It's not
Yeah,
the character is pretty stoic considering
yeah.
the world was this you know sociopathic, almost like capitalism gone way haywire sort
Hmm.
of world. So maybe that's why it relates to today's world.
Yeah.
And then you gotta, think differently, I guess, bend space to get out of it. I don't know, something deeper than that. But that might be the coolest story to me.
Hmm. For me, it's The Walking Dead, the Telltale games.
Okay.
Mechanics wise, it's not really there's much to do. It's just choosing what to do. Like you get to control what happens in the story. So one of
Okay.
the have you played The Walking Dead?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so they take a different story from the TV show. So in this, what happens is that you are the main character. Your name is Lee, and you find this little girl. Her name is Clementine, and you are stuck in a post-apocalyptic world with zombies. So you have to help her survive, and she doesn't have any parents. So you are the one who's looking after her, And by the end of the first, spoilers alert, by the end of the first season, or I think it's the end of the second season, like the stories are in seasons. The second season, what happens is you get bit by a zombie, and now you have to play as Clementine, and you get to decide whether or not to kill you, like whether or not to kill
Whoa,
Lily. And that, and because it's a game, you actually get to make that choice, right? So
cool.
I think that was like, whoa, yeah.
Yeah, and that puts you. That's almost the Wild West story told over again, but way in a way deeper in what do you call it, interactive way, right?
Yeah, and it
You're
makes you think.
you're yeah. Go ahead.
It makes you think. So,
It
and
does.
and if you want to evolve storytelling, then interactive storylines are like the best way to go. And we shouldn't
Yep.
be evolving stories in forms of these propaganda ways. Instead it should be more interactive, where the person who's watching can see different sides of events.
Well, books did that for a while. I don't know if you are familiar, but old like choose your own adventure novels
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
tried to do that. I think like 80s or 90s they got big, but then video games came and said we can do this 100 times
yeah.
better. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And even Netflix tried it, right? Bandersnatch
Oh, did
was,
they? I did.
yeah, I think they did. Bandersnatch was a Black Mirror episode. It was a interactive film.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
That's cool.
that was pretty cool. And yeah, the thing about video games, I recently had the opportunity to try VR, the Oculus Go. So inside Oculus, there's a Netflix app where they place you inside this world with a giant ass TV in front of you, and you are sitting on a couch. So you can get almost the same experience as you're sitting in a big theater at your home inside a VR
Yeah,
headset. And once
that's
VR becomes mainstream, then I think it's gonna bring out different, more interactive, more immersive ways of storytelling. So that's something optimistic to look forward to.
yeah. Well, and here's the thought too, right? Because the counter or the knee jerk reaction to VR is like, or to what you just said is like, well, that just means people aren't going to go out and experience the real world anymore, right?
Yeah,
That's sort of like that's the trope. And to me, it's like what is real about a movie theater? Like going to a movie theater, it's like you took whatever hill or pasture was there, you cut down all the trees, you paved over it with cement, you built this whole thing around it, and this, like how is that quote unquote more real? You know what I mean? We just like
yeah.
dumped a bunch of shit on there and like created this thing that's like, oh, the theater's supposed to be here. This is like a monument or something that's timeless. It's like, no, as this is just a really shitty version of VR, really. But it's too expensive to build in everybody's house, so we just built it here, and you come. So maybe we're kind of on accident by abandoning these the quote unquote real world that everyone says. We're actually letting the real world take over. Uh,
Hmm.
and then we have our homes, we create our own little narrative so we can survive, and then the real world can do what it wants. And maybe this is kind of a step towards like a more harmonious relationship with the
Yep.
real world.
And
I don't know.
and what's funny is that the thing that we call real world in itself is like a virtual reality, because it's kind of the our computer. If you imagine our brain to be a computer, it's kind of simulating this virtual storyline of the real world, and
Right,
that's how we are coexisting. So, and that's why
right,
we get
right,
occasional shocks, right? When these narratives that we have in our head doesn't align with the universe.
for sure.
So
And it really upsets people.
yeah, it really upsets
Uh,
people. It's Jordan Peterson's way of saying, like, you're going from the domain of order to the domain of chaos. And
yeah,
maybe we are. And another thing that Peter Thiel says is that we should be worried about these things not happening sooner, because this whole general fear about technology is kind of pushing technological development far and far away. And that is kind of it's almost revealing certain holes in our society that we have been trying to close with our technological advancements.
Could you give an example?
Like, for example, what's happening right now is that we have this fear of AI, and it's like general AI is gonna come and it's gonna replace all humans.
Yeah,
And anybody who understands even some level of biology or psychology knows that we are light years ahead from figuring out how the brain works. And we don't
Right.
even know that yet. So it's general AI is way, way ahead in the future. It's maybe 50 years down the line. But we will surely have this specialized AI which is going to be good at doing one particular task. So it can all it's probably going to be used as a tool for humans. So if,
Yep.
for example, if you're a doctor, then you can get these radiology scans, and then the AI will tell you if this is likely to be um, of that a person who has cancer more accurately than a human being. But that doesn't mean the computer can process all the other multivariant factors of that person's medical history and make a correct medical recommendation for that person. So for that, you will need a doctor who can look at more data at the same time and make sense out of it. So it's probably going to be a tool that is going to aid us rather than this whole apocalyptic thing, um, at least in the near future. But the problem is that because nobody wants to talk about the reality of these technologies, right? Like if you're someone who's doing research on AGI, then you don't want to say that, okay, this will take another 100 years. Then if you say that, then you won't get funding. And engineers, I'm also an engineer, I'm also guilty for this. We are optimistic people. So we are always going to say, oh, it's going to happen, it's going to change everything, it's going to happen, it's going to change everything. So when you tell these narratives like that, what happens is it creates this fear of, okay, machines are going to come and they're going to replace all jobs, and that stops these technological advancements. Like, for example, we have been almost in a stagnation in every world outside the world of bits. Like in the world of bits, which is computers, we're constantly bringing new things, and even that you can say that like almost for the last 10 years, our major advancements has just been applications. Like either it's social media or it's
Right.
just apps. Like we haven't done anything major as of like VR or AR. It's there, but nothing is mainstream.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
I know it's funny. Like, how do you talk about where the limit is if you don't go there? What did you say that made me think? Yeah, I guess so. Again, all I can really do is go back to analogies. This is the way I understand it. And but like people who were uncomfortable, say with like horseless carriages, right? With when cars were starting to be invented, they couldn't like articulate that we're gonna have like high speed collisions at 60 miles per hour that we're gonna have to deal with.
hmm
You know, they just saw the car and were like, "Whoa, this is weird. This isn't the horse and carriage. Like, how could this possibly be a good thing for the world?" And and it just comes with its new set of problems. So I think that maybe people who have the yeah, people obviously go too far with it. They'll say that the AI is gonna take us over. Skynet is gonna kill us all, and that's a little bit of a hysteria about it. But the general idea of like this is going to introduce a whole new host of problems that we're gonna have to deal with isn't wrong. We will. I mean, we don't know what those problems are going to be, but it's going to be something. It's not going to be extermination, I don't think. But I think that's what it is at its core, and I don't really know how to deal with that. Part of it is, I think, engineers, and I worked with engineers. I'm an electrician, and I know exactly what you mean. Uh, they do have a sense of getting into the books and proving, quote unquote, that this will be the perfect fix to everything, and that it's the maintenance guy's jobs to crush their dreams by telling you it's broken. Which I'll admit I take a little bit of joy in. but but it's just how it is, right? We have to be idealists in order to invent this stuff, and then we have to face reality when it breaks down, and then try to do it better. And that I think this is going to keep happening over and over again.
Yep. And
But right,
to connect it back, another good way of thinking about it is like Socrates used to be afraid of books because he thought that books would kill original thinking. And
I mean, yeah, in a way, he was right. No one can memorize 500-line poems anymore, but we don't need to.
yeah, maybe that's not a bad thing.
Yep.
And to like bind this back to our original topic, we can see this amount of pessimism in the stories that we're trying to tell. Like we used to have Star Wars and Star Trek, which were optimistic visions of the future, and then now we have Black Mirror, which is a show that's just about how technology can go evil. Like
Sure.
and in one way, these stories are important because Black Mirror like forces you to think about the problems of technology advancing in a dystopian way, but we should also be concerned about technology not advancing at all because at this point we are just printing money. Our economy is just based on trust. There's nothing that is um, like it's not based on anything. The government can print as much as they want. There's no gold standard or anything. So if we are not advancing in technology, then it's gonna reveal these holes even more. So we do have a risk of that.
Interesting. So, okay, so my question would be, if that's true, then so I guess we can take a step back. Technology advanced this quickly because we had this story in our head that it would make things better, right? So, like
Hmm.
maybe stories like iRobot and maybe 2001: Space Odyssey. I don't know, but just the general feel was that like the more we invent, the more we come up with new things, the better life will get for more people. Rising tide lifts all boats, yada yada.
Yeah.
And so we need that story to advance. That's true. And then I guess the brakes of this car would be Black Mirror. Hey, technology creates this inequality that we're not dealing with, and opens up these like dark portals to the human soul that we haven't fixed or may never fix. And now they have the dark parts of our soul will have access to this technology too. Is this a good thing? So
Hmm.
my question would be where the 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 traditional solution to this would just be to move mediums, right? If movies are starting to get bad, let's just go make good video games. Or if you know,
Yeah.
what I'm saying, if the knights are taking over, we invent bow and arrow. So where would be the next step from you know, I don't even know what you would call this era of like technology where everyone's interconnected. What is the solution? Where do we move to next? You
I
know,
think, yeah, I get what you're saying. So one of the things that I think is when you have, let me think about this. Hmm. Yeah, so you, first thing is that inequality in general is, you can say that it's almost a law of nature because nature is primarily based on inequality. We have different species and we have hierarchies of that of those animals. Like for example, you can't expect a sheep to be on the same level of a lion. So
right?
that's kind of nature. And I think that technology in general is us finding out the rules of nature and finding ways in which we can manipulate it to meet our needs. So technology is, maybe you can say technology is kind of anti-nature because we are fighting nature. Nature is not always a good thing. It also comes with
Right.
earthquakes, tsunamis, and all kinds of disasters which are super dangerous for us as a species. So we can't always look at nature as something that's positive. It's chaos. And technology and technological advancements are our way of manipulating it to meet our needs. So yes, there's always going to be inequality, but I think technology is our best shot of reducing it. And I don't know. At least that's just the way I think about it for now. Like, and what's next? I think every media has this time frame where it's just pure, right? Where the masses are not using it. There's only a very few people using it. So it's pure, and the people who are using it are not using it because of any agenda. They're using it because they enjoy it. Every media starts off like that, but when it gets populated, it ends up being corrupted. And that's kind of
Yep.
the case with everything, whether it's radio, whether it's television, whether it's social media in general. Social media started off something that was a net positive, and
Yep.
today it's I don't know what it is today. It had a lot of benefits, but now we're starting to question it. So for now, at least, we have some medias which are still pure. Like we are, it's a bit of an untapped territory, and video games can't say that it's completely pure right now because they used to be pure. If you look at
Mhm.
storylines 10 years before or maybe 20 years before, games were made with love. And
Right, they had that
today,
innocence. Yeah.
yeah, today when you shift to this whole multiplayer online environment, we are losing single player titles, one, which is primarily based on stories. Second thing, single player titles are not doing well financially, so we can't just blame the companies for it. And that's not entirely true because we still have franchises like Witcher and Cyberpunk is coming out, which is probably going to do amazingly well. And GTA 5 had an amazing storyline. So it's not like you have to have just you have to pick between storyline and gameplay. GTA 5
Mhm.
did a very good job of bringing both. Like GTA Online is still popular, and the original GTA 5 storyline, I think it's my favorite story out of all GTAs. So, but it
So
took 6 years to make, and 6, 7 years to make. So most companies
what's
don't invest at
what's
all.
GD? What's GD? Sorry.
GTA, GTA,
Oh,
Grand
Grand
Theft
Theft Auto.
Auto.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I never played any of them, but yeah, I
yeah.
hear good things.
Yeah, the
Huh.
normally their stories are just lame, like it's just gangster stories, and their focus is not really on story. But GTA 5 did a very good job of there were three main characters and the storylines were very connected, and three characters were well written, and it was a very fun game to play. But
Okay, so they
those
have the
those are
sweet
just
spot. Yeah.
exceptions. Those are just exceptions. And Witcher 3 was Game of the Year, and a DLC, which is like a downloadable content of that game, became
Mhm.
the next year's Game of the Year. So, and
Nice.
those are just pure storyline kind of games. And it's not like storyline games are out of fashion anymore. It's just that not many people are doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too that uh that the rebirth of the story through the video games get really big with like EA and companies basically churning out these like procedurally generated titles.
Yeah.
And then GTA can still break through because they're kind of like they're in that realm of like the outside, right? They're outside the law, outside of morality, and they can still have that freedom. It reminds me of like when TV shows started to dip. HBO came out with The Sopranos, which
Yeah.
got crazy popular, and that's kind of what unlocked this whole longer storyline. So something about the outlaw, the outsider is can somehow redeem whatever medium you're in. That's very interesting.
Yep. Good thing that you brought
For
up Sopranos. Sopranos was really like I just recently finished watching Sopranos. Um, I wasn't watching it during its prime time. I was too young for
yeah,
that, I guess.
yeah, same.
Uh, but now that I look back at Sopranos, I would have appreciated it more if I had seen it back in 2000s when this type of storytelling was not really mainstream and it triggered all of these other shows. The Wire, for example, is my favorite TV show of all time. I used to
Dude.
think that
Yeah,
Breaking Bad is the greatest, but The Wire is
yeah,
on a different league.
I completely agree, sir. Completely agree.
Yeah, I think they should make it mandatory for every fucking person on the planet to watch that show because you learn
Oh,
so much from it.
you can't argue anything with police or crime or racism, in my opinion, intelligently without having that as your background, like software,
Yeah,
because it's just so hard to understand it without that context. Yeah.
and not just police, it's also about politics and the world
Yes.
in
Yep.
general, right?
Yes. Yes. And institutions and
Yeah,
people and stuff. Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah. That's why he crushed it, man. It so it just works on every single level. It just yeah.
it was life in general. I wouldn't say it's a TV show. It's the most accurate representation of life I've seen on screen because it
Yeah.
shows
Which is
you
it.
that
Yeah.
how institutions become corrupt because individuals within those institutions fail to take collective responsibility, which is this narrative that people like Jordan Peterson want to say. But it also
Mhm.
shows you the life of those people who, which is as complex as you think of the institutions. Like they are not doing these things primarily because they are looking for self-interest, but their environment is in that way where they can't always put the hierarchy in front of them. Like,
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. And it shows every like there were characters who tried to change it, like Bunny and
yeah,
or not like your name and
yeah,
what's the Stringer Bell, right? Both of
yeah.
those guys were respectively like, okay, here's what's wrong, let's fix it, and both of them just got destroyed,
Oh, it was
and just
brutal. Yeah.
basically just hung in front of the crowd and like, all right, here's what happens when you change the institution, motherfucker. It's like, oh, here's why this stays the same. Got it. I don't want to be that guy.
And then it's also interesting. Like in the end, Bunny ends up adopting like I don't remember his name. What was the name of that kid? But a kid from the street, and that kid from the street changed his life, right? Like he went out to change his whole history. He didn't end up being a kid
Oh,
from the
we based son,
yeah,
the
V-Bay.
drug dealer's son. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, V-Bay. So he turned around his life. And so you can say that Bunny made the whole situation better, not by trying to fix the institutions, but by fixing an individual life. And that
Yep,
is like, wow, what a. And you also see the whole, it's like a carousel, right? It shows how characters end up being the people they are today.
yep.
And you can't even say one person in that show is evil, except for maybe Marlowe, he was a complete psychopath in that show.
Right,
And I
right. He
think he was
definitely was.
written intentionally that way. But every other character had this shade of gray where you can't really question them for doing what they're doing. At the same
Totally,
time, love or hate
totally.
them.
Yeah, and even with Marlowe, right? Like the elements that allowed him to succeed were such. You know what I mean? Like he
Yeah.
normally should just be some regular street thug, but some things happened, and it tells that whole story, and uh, and why guys like that survive. Um,
Yep.
yeah, but God, we could talk about the Wire for
Yeah, it could
hours,
be an
man. It's so
entire
good.
another episode. Oh, I
It
love
might
that
be a
show.
good one. But so
Yeah.
maybe we could wrap it back to the whole storyline, right? So for years, I mean, you couldn't have made The Wire like when you invented the TV or movies, right? Like
Yeah.
if you try to come out with it back in the 30s, right? You have to go through, oh my God, this train looks like it's moving even though it's in this box, right? And
Yep.
you just have to go very slowly. Then you go to, oh man, this is the life we all want to live. Here's Hollywood, blah blah blah. And so all these things kind of have to happen, and then The Wire has to come out when it comes out for people to be familiar with TV shows and how they work and like storyline beats and character development, yada yada, and then that's what allows things like The Wire to just completely unfold in a really real way without getting rejected. So
Hmm.
maybe that'll happen. Maybe that's like an inevitable thing. I don't know. I would very much like for people to be more like David Simon and be able to like throw in all their love and passion into one project.
Yep. And to think that the show was not successful when it came out originally, it became like a cult classic later on. Like
Yeah,
when the show was actually being aired, people weren't appreciating the whole thing. And that's
yeah. I
kind of
heard that
sad.
it is sad, and they had a fight to keep it on the air, and I think they're going to do season 6 about immigration too, from what I heard, but they just ran out of funding.
Yeah,
But
sad. And another thing to uh, think about is we were talking about how these stories are popping up in different forms. And one of the interesting places I see is BoJack Horseman. So, uh, have you seen the show?
no, I haven't. I heard it was actually really really well
It
done.
is, I would say it's as good as Sopranos because
Okay.
it opens up a whole new can of worms. And what it does is it deals with these hard questions of psychology and how trauma is passed upon generations. So it's
Hmm.
almost like Tony Soprano, and you can see that he became who he is because of the family history, right? So the way he was brought up, his mother, the toxic family that he was brought up in. It's not just that;
Yeah.
it's also some amount of free will, but still, it's predominantly the way in which you're brought up. And BoJack does a very good job of dealing with these topics. And the best thing they do is that they're doing it in form of animation. So the main
Yeah.
character is an animated horse,
Right.
and almost all the other characters, except for few, are all animals. Except we have very few human characters in the show, and they're addressing topics that are primarily related to humans, which is psychology, family, trauma, all those serious topics which you can't really express without getting slammed by the public. But when you put it in an animated show with animated characters, it kind of lets you, it gives you the freedom to play around with the whole gray element of characters, which is just like The Wire, without getting the same backlash as you would if you did it in real action, like real time, real
Right.
live
You
action.
you somehow you remove all the chaff sort and see what's underneath. Yeah, I see that.
It's a very
Yeah, because
revolutionary show.
that is something that art has to do, right? Because we're going back to The Wire, right? You can maybe see why it didn't catch on because it criticized Republicans in this episode, or criticized Democrats, and it criticized it criticized whatever your certain tribe was, and could have
Yeah.
had an opinion on it. Whereas if it's like if your character has a horse head, I've never met anybody with a horse head, so I don't have an opinion on them going into the show. So maybe
Yeah.
that's why it was safe. That's why it's safe for that kind of surrealism to explore those truths.
Hmm.
But I'll check that one out. I've heard really good things that tackles addiction and things like that.
You should. It deals with all kinds of philosophies. There's a and it's heavily inspired from Sopranos as well. Like with Sopranos, what happened was that the Lydia who was playing Tony's mom, she died an early death during the making of the show. So they
Oh, I
kind of
didn't know
had
that.
to, so they had to write off her storyline. But BoJack has a character. His mother's almost inspired from Lydia, and they really get to explore her character in ways which is just beautiful. It's a beautiful show which makes you relate with all the characters as well as hate them. It's the closest representation to human psychology, and um, it's the story of an animated horse, which is
Yeah,
ironic.
yeah, that's pretty cool. Huh. Yeah, it's cool. I've noticed more and more people talking. Maybe I don't know if it's because I'm older or if the culture's changing, but exploring how trauma's passed down. My last girlfriend was Russian or from a Russian family,
Hmm.
and it made me. I guess I never really realized that. I grew up in California where diversity was this kind of like tagline, right? Like I
Yeah.
have these and these such friends. If you're you know Persian or Indian, your value isn't that your culture. It's that like it makes me look like I have diverse friends.
Hmm.
It's kind of what it came down to. But I didn't never really realize that like very recently. I saw almost all my grandparents live to very old age. If you're lived in Russia or China or Japan or even India, like you probably didn't. Like there's a good chance that your grandfather got killed by someone else, and that hatred is not very long ago. So uh, it's cool to see that people are trying to tackle that individually, which is seems to be catching on.
Yep. And it all goes back to that, right? It's all about the individuals. We all get to create our own meanings, our own stories.
Sure. I mean, and
But
that's
it's,
scary, right? Because oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, go.
Oh, I mean, I was going to say that's scary, right? Because if I have a story that says, "Well, my grandpa got killed by Germans because Germans are just evil assholes," that's okay.
Hmm.
That's easy for me to digest. But if I have to take on like the whole lineage and it's all on me, man, I mean, I kind of understand. I can't draw a direct line to like a modern mental health crisis, but I don't know if I was confronted with the trauma of my family without support or the right tools spiritually to deal with it, I could definitely see myself getting addicted to pills or
Yeah.
whatever it is people's trauma is today.
I used to be
So
very anti-religious, but then I realized that all of religion is just they are the collection of the older stories that has helped us survive.
sure,
So we shouldn't maybe look down on them as much as we are doing today.
I agree. I agree, man. I did the same journey. Did you find yourself drawn to a certain religion today?
Not specifically. I mean, when I was growing up in India, I was surrounded by Hindu mythology. I used to know all the stories. I was really fascinated by the stories. I never really believed as in these characters are real. So I never had
Yeah.
that problem, which always made me question the, uh, like people were actually worshipping these gods as they were actually real, which kind of made me skeptical and made me take the whole atheist path for a while. But then I realized that, oh, that's extremely stupid.
Hmm.
Um, the purpose is not, these stories are not written so that those characters, they're trying to say that those characters are real. That's kind of a lost message. They're trying to expose, um, the way in which the society works. And recently, um, not Christian or anything, but maybe it's because of the influence of both Jordan Peterson as well as Peter Thiel, who talks about René Girard. René Girard was he's a um, he's a historian and he analyzes literature. So the Bible does a good job of exposing the scapegoating nature of human beings, right? So if you take up
Hmm.
mythology, scapegoating is something that's very common in all of them. There's this idea of sacrifice. So instead of to resolve fights between communities, you put all the blame on someone, on a third party who
Right.
both communities can't exactly connect with, and then you just sacrifice that person or an animal, and then you can resolve that conflict for a while. So this was something that helped societies coexist over the years. And what the Bible does is the Jesus is the ultimate scapegoat, and like he is actually revealing this nature of human beings to human beings, and so it's almost exposing this nature of scapegoating. So that was something that was really fascinating. But I don't have a specific preference of religion, and I think all religion should be looked upon together. Like each does its own good way of explaining complex topics.
Yeah.
But then
That.
again, it's kind of
Yeah.
scary, right? That you can
Sure.
create your own story and then like what I see might not be what you see, and what someone else sees, it might lead them into some kind of, violence.
Yeah. I mean, the analogy fits almost scarily well over language, right? So to me, that's I don't know where I picked this up, but it's almost the same as language. So like, there is no ultimate word for tree, right? A tree is just what I call a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Trees exist, but at the root of it, it's just I am limited in the fact that I have to describe this a certain way. And in the same way, I have to describe the world we're living in, and both its gritty, quote unquote, real nature and its sort of platonic, ethereal nature, and I have to do that in a certain way, and I do that through religion and stories, and my word for God might take a different shape or different form, and it probably will because I have a different history. My ancestors grew up in a different geography, uh, and I can be wrong about it the same way I can be wrong in language. I can still mess things up, and it can be scary the same way languages can, or the same way religion can be scary. I am cultivating my own story. I can also cultivate horrible language that ruins people and makes people do bad things. But uh, you know,
Yeah.
you just got to try to do your best and accept the fuck ups and try to make it pretty. I guess. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. I don't know what the
Yep.
takeaway would be from that.
Maybe we can
But
wrap it up in a good way. Like, one good way of wrapping it up is that we all construct our own stories. Yes. And stories are, for me, I'm primarily an engineer, but stories are the things that make me the most happiest, you can say, because when I see a good story, I just, wow, there's nothing, it's just like talking about why it just brights up my eyes and brings in these certain emotions. And yes, we all get to write our own stories, not just about the real world, but also about the things that we're watching. Like we get to write stories of stories. And most often you find that the stories that we are coming up might not fit either with the real world, with what is happening, or we can say that it's biased based on our upbringing. But
hmm.
discussing these stories, whether that's in the form of a comment session on YouTube, whether it's in the form of movie analysis, whether it's in the form of reviews or even discussions like these, I think we can see viewpoints that we fail to see. And every time you're discussing a story, you expose certain parts of it that you missed, and that can help you come up with better representations of that story. And I think discussions and open communication is the only way we can solve almost 90% of the problems. As long as we are not censoring conversations, as long as there is a, a platform or a place where you can have open conversations about stories, about all these complex topics, there is still, it is the world opens up and there is still rays of optimism shining through.
Sure.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I can't top that. I don't know.
I just freestyle the whole thing.
Yeah, I like it. Thanks, man. Of
Yeah, so thank you so much for showing up. This was a great
course.
discussion. We
Yes,
should do
sir.
one on the wire.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Mandatory watching.
yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, man. Yeah,
I'll upload it and I'll put it in our meetings text channel.
sounds good. Have a good night.
Yep, you too. Bye.
Bye.